For joining us. Today's National Cabinet was a constructive discussion with the Premiers and Chief Ministers together with the Family and Domestic Violence Commissioner, Michaela Cronin, who reported to the National Cabinet meeting, was then followed by a report from the Victorian Premier, Jacinda Allen, about the 2016 Royal Commission and that experience arising out of that. We heard from every state and territory jurisdiction about the work that they were doing in their respective states and territories, and we determined to move forward in a range of ways, practical immediate steps, as well as setting a further meeting for the next quarter to report back on issues including the different systems in states and territories and how there can be more uniformity going forward as well. That work will be undertaken with the leadership of the current CAF chair, is Premier Malinauskas of South Australia. This is indeed a national crisis and it's a national challenge, and we're facing this with a spirit of national unity. Today is about who we are as a nation and as a society. We recognise that governments need to act, but we also recognise that this is an issue for the whole of society, not just for governments. It's an issue for civil society, it's an issue for the media, it's an issue for all of us to work together in the national interest to deal with what is a scourge of violence against women that is having a real impact out there, with once every 4 days a woman losing their life at the hand of a domestic or former domestic partner. This is indeed a national crisis, which is why we convened this meeting. We also recognise that this has a traumatic impact on children. Too many children are growing up in households or witnessing violence, or in the worst cases, of course, children growing up without their mums because of their murder at the hands of a domestic partner or a former domestic partner. We want to change this. We want to change this in a way in which we all have to take responsibility, because violence against women is not a women's problem to solve. It is a whole of society problem to solve, and men in particular have to take responsibility. There was a determination around the National Cabinet table. For some of us this is deeply personal, and for all of us this is very, very important. So today we determined some actions we could take immediately, but also looking towards how we change behaviour, how we change the agenda. Today, in terms of outcomes, it builds on the work that our government has already done. The $2.3 billion we've committed, the 10 days family and domestic violence leave, the changes to the single parenting payment, the increased funding for community workers, the increased funding for housing for women and children escaping domestic violence through the Housing Australia Future Fund. We know that when a woman is killed by a violent partner, too often some people will say, why didn't she leave? And it's because of there not being options, which is why it is very important that we don't put people in the situation where they can't afford to leave a violent relationship. So today we can announce the government will invest $925 million over 5 years. It will be included in the budget in 2 weeks' time to permanently establish the Leaving Violence program, so that those escaping violence can receive financial support, safety assessments and referrals to support pathways. Those eligible will be able to access up to $5,000 in financial support, along with referral services, risk assessments and safety planning. This commitment builds on measures put in place by our government to help address financial barriers to escaping violence. Some of those measures I spoke about before in terms of domestic violence leave, investing in crisis accommodation. Today also we're announcing a suite of online measures to help combat toxic male extremist views about women online. When I've spoken to parents around the country, they express their concern about the exposure of young boys and young men to violent videos and imagery online, and that is something that was mentioned by states and territories when they went around what their jurisdictions were doing. We will introduce legislation to ban the creation and distribution of deepfake pornography, sharing sexually explicit material using technology like artificial intelligence will be subject to serious criminal penalties. A new phase of the Stop It at the Start campaign will launch in mid-June and will run until May 2025. This new phase will include a counter-influencing campaign in online spaces where violent and misogynistic content thrives to directly challenge the material in the spaces that it's being viewed. The government's undertaking long overdue classification reforms with states and territories, which will examine options to reduce exposure to violent pornography, informed by engagement with experts and best available evidence about harms. Finally, we've brought forward the reporting date of the review of the Online Safety Act a year ahead of schedule to ensure we're keeping up with emerging online threats and harms. This was a particular focus of debate, so that when the Victorian Premier reported on the Royal Commission, one of the things that was very stark was just how much technology has changed the nature of the threat and the damage which is being done by this new use of technology, and it's something that we're very, very conscious of. The government will also bring forward legislation in early August to outlaw the release of private information online with an intent to cause harm. This is known as doxing, of course, and has been a debate. Finally, I want to acknowledge the very important work that the Attorney-General is leading to strengthen penalties targeting the creation and non-consensual sharing of sexually explicit deepfakes, which is there. I do urge parents to visit the e.safety.gov.au website and to look at their resources, which are based on research and expert advice. We, of course, have quadrupled funding for the E-Safety Commissioner because of the increased role that online activity is calling across a range of areas, not the least of which, though, is in attitudes towards women, attitudes towards violence. This is a debate that we have to have as a society because it is having an extraordinary impact, and I think that that was a common theme of the contributions this morning. It was a very constructive meeting, and I thank the Premiers and Chief Ministers for making themselves available for this. I'll now turn to the Family and Domestic Violence Commissioner, and then we'll hear from the ministers about the respective reforms that are being proposed in their areas. Commissioner.
Thank you, Prime Minister. It was a real honour and responsibility to be able to present to National Cabinet today the first National Cabinet we have had on men's violence against women. I began as Australia's first domestic, family and sexual violence 18 months ago, but I began my career as a social worker working in a women's refuge over 30 years ago. And in that time, I have seen some incredibly dramatic change, but as we are all talking about today, some failures of our society changing enough in some very important areas. It's really significant that we have had a national cabinet today. It's been triggered by the appalling spate of deaths, as the Prime Minister and others have referred to. One woman every 4 days being murdered. Every next one of those women is too many. Like many of you, I wake up every day and pick up my phone worried about what news I'm going to see and the impact that that will have on communities. But we also know that that's just the tip of the iceberg. I met yesterday with the National Lived Experience Advisory Council, which I think is one of the most important things I've been able to achieve as I've undertaken this role, bringing together people from across the country who have direct lived experience of domestic, family and sexual violence. And the message from those men and women was that they are very triggered and distressed about what is occurring at the moment, but really pleased that we are finally having such a united national conversation. I agree with what the Prime Minister said about the National Cabinet today. It was a very unified discussion. There were very consistent themes, and I was very pleased to hear the commitment to come back next quarter to report on the efforts that are being made across the country, and to keep a spotlight and to keep efforts really on the national agenda to end domestic and family violence.